Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Come and eat. Listen diligently to me.
Shalom, everyone. Nathan Lawrence here, Hoshana Rabbah. So today I'd like us to go to Luke chapter 17. And we see that the disciples of Yeshua asked a question of him, and he gives a very curious answer. And it's an answer that does not seem to, it seems to be a non-answer answer. And yet there is a deep mystery in the answer. And I'm going to read this. A deep spiritual mystery that is so profound that the answer to which may unleash some powerful aspects in your life, some spiritual dynamics in your life that I think all of us would like to see more of. Luke 17 verse 5. And the disciples, the apostles said to Yeshua, or said to the Lord, increase our faith. So the Lord said, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be pulled up by the roots and be planted in the sea, and it would obey you. And which of you, having a servant plowing or tending sheep, will say to him when he has come into the field, come at once and sit down to eat? But will he not rather say to him, prepare something for my supper and gird yourself and serve me till I have eaten and drunk, and afterward you will eat and drink? Does he thank that servant because he did the things that were commanded him? I think not. So likewise, when you have come, have done all those things which you are commanded, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done what was our duty to do. What is the correlation between increase our faith, and if you have faith, the amount of a mustard seed, which is a very small amount, that this explosive release of power will take place in a person's life? What is the relationship? And then the parable of the servant. What is the relationship between these? And how does the question that the apostles asked relate to the response that Yeshua gave? Yeshua is constantly giving enigmatic questions or answers to the questions that are asked him. And some of them are real head scratchers. So let me refer to my notes here, because I had to scratch my head over this one. As I write here and looking at my notes in front of me, as is often the case in the Gospels, Yeshua's answers to his disciples questions is a bit of an enigmatic head scratcher. How does his answer relate to their question in this chapter about how to increase one's faith? Let us explore the connection between faithfulness and miracles of faith. In this passage, Yeshua initially answers his disciples' questions by tersely stating that a small amount of faith produces a great, even a miraculous results. then, as we just read, he launches into a discussion about the faithful attendance to duty and ends the discussion there. And his answer begs thoughtfulness. Like, we've got to plumb the depths and actually explore, like, what is the relationship here? And it causes one to think and to meditate. I don't think the average person is going to necessarily come up with the answer. It's really something that the Ruach, the Holy Spirit, has to kind of give revelation. This almost goes back to the idea that Yeshua said, I don't give you these parables to make the truth that I'm giving apparent to the masses. I give these parables in order to obscure the truth. Why? So that those who want to know the truth will not just be dismissive of the answer and just say, I can't understand it, this makes no sense, but they will actually dig in to look for the answer, and in so doing will find a precious nugget. Will find a precious nugget and a mother lode of revelation. So, what do these seemingly discordant statements of Yeshua have to do with each other? Upon reflection, the answer, I believe, becomes evident. He is saying that faith resulting in miracles comes as a result of a servant being faithful by doing the will of his master. In this case, the master is Yehovah Elohim. Let's unpack this. As an example of the connection between faith and faithfulness, let's consider Yeshua's command to his disciples concerning the Great Commission. Yeshua promised that certain miracles would follow, signs and wonders would follow his disciples when they faithfully fulfill this command to preach the gospel. We read this in Mark 16, verses 15 through 18. He said, if you preach the gospel, he says, go ye therefore in the world, preach the gospel, make disciples, and these signs will follow you. You will lay hands on the sick, you will resurrect the dead, you will speak with new tongues, you will encounter demonic forces and powers that will try to take you out, and I will give you the victory over that. Often one hears Christians wondering why they do not see many miraculous signs and wonders happening today. Maybe it is because they are not being faithful to their master's command to preach the gospel to the whole world, or at least to share the gospel boldly with those around them. So the preaching of the gospel is just one example of miracles of faith following obedience to the master's commands. So now let's go a little deeper and demystify the connection between faith, like faith is in the size of a mustard seed, and faithfulness. Consider this. What is the relationship between faith and faithfulness? When one is faithful to his master's will and is faithfully executing his responsibilities as the servant in this parable, what happens? By immersing oneself in the will of one's master with one's whole heart, one will be totally in tune with the master. That is, one will know the heart, the mind, and the will of their master. He will know the desires of the master, how the master thinks, and what the master wants him to do, and what the master wants him to do next. Just like the servant in the parable. He knew that when he got in from the field, his master wanted food and wanted to be served and wanted to be ministered to. And once the will of the master was done, then the servant could go and get himself something to eat. That's exactly what Yeshua did. When he came to the earth, he did the will of his Father above his own will. That's the example that we have set before us. That's his reasonable service. That is what was expected of him. Not my will be done, but thine be done. Seek ye first the kingdom of Elohim, and the rest of everything in your life will take care of itself. So on this basis and from this spiritual launch pad, the servant can extend his faith and predict the will of the master, what the master wants him to do next, and then the servant can step out in faith and accomplish it even if it requires a miracle to do so. So this concept of if you speak to the tree with the mustard seed of faith, and it will be uprooted, plucked up by the roots, and cast into the sea. The idea here, without focusing so much on the analogy, but let's focus on the idea that it is Yah's will that I do this, this, and this. I know it because He has told me. He's told me in His Word. He's commissioned me specifically to do this. I know that. I know His heart. He wants me to go here or do this or do that. And therefore, if there's obstacles in the way, a tree or whatever, or a mountain or whatever, it will be cast into the sea because it's an obstacle for me to accomplish the will of my Father, which He's already showed me what it is. I can think of several examples in my own life, especially when I was out on the mission field. There have been times, this has happened a number of times, where when I was out open air preaching, whether it was in a Mexican migrant camp, or whether it was this happened a number of times, migrant camps in our local area, or whether it was on the streets of Portland, or whether it was one time I was climbing Mount St. Helens with a group of young people from a church, and the weather was turning adverse, such that it was going to be rainy or stormy upon us. And I knew that that was going to be deleterious or counterproductive to the accomplishment of what Yah wanted me to do. So I spoke to the weather, the rain, the wind, the clouds, and this has happened on a number of occasions, too many to mention. And I commanded them, like Yeshua did when He spoke to the storm. I said, be still, blow the opposite direction, rain, go around us, or whatever. And it obeyed. One time, I was ministering in one place, and it was rain. The rain was coming. You could see it coming our direction. And it went around us. Another time, I went a couple of miles away, and the rain began to come there. Oh, and the rain was raining where I was about to go next, like a mile or two away. And I went to that place, and it was starting to rain, and the rain then went to the place I was just at. Another time we were at Sukkot. I've told this story before, and many people were camping. And we were on the Oregon coast, and this huge rainstorm was coming. We literally went down to the beach with our shofars, and we stood on the beach of flanks of shofars, and we we literally, the rain was starting to come on us. We could feel the drops. And there was no clouds out there. We could see whatever it is to the horizon, like 14 miles. It was dark. And so we prophesied and commanded in the name of Yeshua the storm to cease and to go around us. And within 10 minutes after making that prophecy, 5 or 10 minutes, there was a slit of blue sky that opened up on the horizon. And by the time we made it off the beach up into the campground, we had blue sky over us, and the rain, a major storm, split and went around us. We got reports of downpour 30 miles south of us, and it rained for the next several hundred miles north of us. And the weather forecasters on the television said, we don't know what happened, but it's like the rain split around Gold Beach, Oregon, and it just split and went around that. There was a time that I was ministering on the streets of Portland late at night, walking the streets, and I came across a man who was drunk. And he was a young fellow. And he was drunk, but he was still operationally drunk. You could smell it on him. And he was sitting in the park blocks, and I came up along him, side of him, started to talk to him and give him the gospel, sat down next to him, and he was going to commit suicide that night. And I began to talk to him about Yeshua and the hope of salvation. And he was open. He was desperate. And joy began to come, but he was still drunk. And I said, Lord, I told him, I said, Yeshua wants to show you that he's real. I just stepped out on faith. And I said, if you believe it, you will receive it. That you will be made sober, no signs of inebriation on you. As soon as I pray. I prayed, I said, Yeshua, take the spirit of drunkenness away from him. And immediately it was gone as a sign to this young man that Yeshua was real and that he cared and loved him. And he was made totally sober. And we walked down the street for a couple blocks, singing and dancing and enjoying. This is just a couple stories that come immediately to my head. You know, you might say, well, that's not much, but it was a lot for the people involved. And I could probably give other stories, and many of you have testimonies too. Now, the reason I bring this up, not to say that I'm anything great, but because I'm not, but I was doing the will of the Father at that time, doing ministry, preaching the gospel. I was out there, and we were out there. And, in one case, keeping the Feast of Tabernacles. And Yah answered, and I could write a book about the things that I've seen. So, an example of stepping out in faith from the launch pad of faithfulness, as I was mentioning, based on fulfilling the Yeshua the Master's will for his redeemed believers to expand the kingdom of heaven by sharing the gospel with others. That's an example of stepping out in faith. Some of us don't experience miracles because we're not stepping out on faith to do anything. But in so doing, when we do step out on faith, it is walking hand in hand with the will of the Master to reverse the effects of the kingdom of darkness by healing the sick and casting out demons and preaching the gospel, just as Mark 16:15 through 18 talk about. In this manner, the kingdom of heaven is expanded at a time as per the heart and the will of Yeshua. And the preacher of the gospel should understand this correlation between faithfulness and miraculous faith, which is why, after sharing the gospel with others, or doing whatever, in one case we were just observing the Feast of Tabernacles. So it's not necessarily just preaching the gospel, it's doing the will of Elohim, whatever that is for your life. But when we do that, one can expect to heal the sick, cast out demons, speak to the storm clouds, speak to the rain, whatever the miracle that is needed, and we can expect results. So it is really that simple. It is a matter of cause and effect. That's why I talk about demystifying this whole thing. Faith-based miracles is the natural consequence of faithfulness to execute the Master's will. If one does not see miracles in one's life, perhaps it is because one is not really doing or being obedient to the will of their Master. And I would say that that would apply to anything in our lives. If we're not seeing prayers answered, we're not believing, we're not seeing, the desires of our hearts, maybe it's because we're not walking in the will of our Father. Maybe it's because we are walking contrary to the will of our Father, and we're not hearing Him and obeying Him in certain areas of our lives. So, I hope that this little discussion maybe will cause a few of us to look at ourselves in the mirror, see where we fall short, and maybe where we can step up to the next level and begin to experience more of the mountain moving miracles or the plucking up the tree miracles, and see them begin to happen more frequently in our lives. And faith is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the more you practice it, the more it grows, the bolder and the stronger it gets. If you don't have the faith to ask for a little thing, how are you going to have the faith to ask for a big thing? And if you're not being obedient in little areas, how are we to expect to be obedient in the large areas of our lives? They all go hand in hand. I'm thinking of the parable of the talents, about the individual were given a certain number of talents, and the one man buried it in the sand, didn't do anything with it. So he received a small reward, and he didn't receive any reward. He received punishment because he was not faithful in little. He was not faithful at all. So anyway, onward and upward, and I hope that at least in one way explains this otherwise maybe enigmatic, mysterious teaching of Yeshua the Messiah. And maybe this will inspire you to go onward and upward. All right, thank you for listening. Shalom.
Come, everyone who thirsts. Come to the waters. Come and eat. Listen diligently to me, and eat what is good.